Galatians 3:3, are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now being made perfect by the flesh? Now, when that's corrected in translation, what Paul is saying, are you being foolish in this way? Are you foolish in this way? The first word in the Greek text is hutos, which indicates something that's coming up in this manner or in this way. Are you being foolish? It's the same word that you find at the beginning of John 3:16, where we translate, for God so loved the world. Literally, it's God loved the world in this manner, that He gave His unique Son to die on the cross for us. So here Paul is saying, are you foolish in this manner? Are you being foolish in this manner? After beginning by means of the Spirit, which is how we begin our Christian life. Titus 3:5 says that it's not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to His mercy He saved us by the washing of regeneration and renewal of the Holy Spirit. So we begin by the Holy Spirit. He's the one who regenerates us. Are you so foolish in this way that after beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now being matured by means of the flesh? So there is the contrast there that demonstrates that there is a battle now between the flesh, meaning our own efforts to save ourselves, to try to solve problems, surmount hardships on our own efforts, and trying to go forward by simply doing the right thing, by thinking that, oh, I can grow as a Christian if I read my Bible, if I pray, if I just avoid certain overt sins, that somehow spiritual growth is going to take place. But what Paul emphasizes in Galatians 3 is there's a contrast between living the Christian life on the basis of the Holy Spirit or by means of the Spirit and doing it from your own effort. He says this same kind of thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3, which is in the context of a contrast between being spiritual and being carnal. And in verse 3 of 1 Corinthians 3, he says, for you are still carnal. That is, you, Corinthians, are still fleshly, literally. You are still operating on the flesh, on the sin nature. You're trying to live on the basis of your own ability instead of God's. And he says, for where there's envy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving what? Like mere men, literally just like men. In other words, you're trying to live the Christian life on the basis of human effort alone, and you've left the Holy Spirit completely out of the equation. And the result is failure. That even when you start off trying to live the Christian life on the basis of morality, because you're living apart from God, it's a self-righteousness produced by the sin nature, and the end result is always going to be converted into overt sin or mental attitude sin or sins of the tongue. And that's what happened in Corinth, and that's what happened even in Paul's own life. He said in Romans 7, no matter how much I tried to obey the law, and remember the law is holy, just, and good, but no matter how much I tried to obey it, I always ended up in sin. Every time. No matter how moral I tried to be, sooner or later I discovered there was lust and covetousness that surfaced, and this is what told me that I was unable to fulfill the law at all on my own, and I needed to rely on God's grace. So when we try to live the Christian life on the basis of morality, on the basis of all these different systems, I remember years ago there was a book called The Disciplines of the Christian Life, and it's talking about good things and important things, prayer, witnessing, giving, all these other things that are aspects of our priesthood, but they were making those the means of the Christian life, the means of spiritual growth. And what Paul is saying in Galatians is that that's just trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. There's no external power there, and the Christian life is a supernatural life that's got to be energized by a supernatural power. You just cannot do it on your own. And so we come to Galatians 5:16, to walk by means of the Spirit. And the result is you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So we see that same contrast between spirit and flesh. And the command is to walk. It's a present active imperative. Now the reason I like to, and I believe that this is the main command, not the filling of the Spirit, is because this is an active voice imperative. If you look at the Greek of Ephesians 5:18, where it says to be filled by means of the Spirit, the command to be filled is a present passive imperative. Now, the difference is that in an active voice verb, the subject performs the action. In a passive voice verb, the subject receives the action. So when you're problem solving, when you're dealing with the problems of sin in your life, the priority goes to that which is active, not which is passive in terms of a command. A passive command means that you receive something. An active command means you do something. So the first thing we do is we confess sin. The next thing we do is start walking, taking steps by means of God the Holy Spirit. The passive side of that command is as we fulfill the active side of walking, we will be filled by means of the Holy Spirit. Do you understand that distinction? When we're taking the active steps, responding to the active voice imperative, then we receive, because the filling of the Spirit is a passive thing. We're active only in the sense that we are receptive to something. But the active command is to walk, to take those steps, step by step by step. So let me remind you, confession doesn't get you anywhere but back in the game. But to go forward, to advance spiritually, you respond to the active voice imperative, which means to walk. As you are walking, because you are in fellowship, you will receive the filling of the Holy Spirit. And we'll explain that in a little more detail in just a minute. So the word walking, peripateo, has the idea in most passages of the physical act of walking, such as in Acts chapter 3, verses 6 through 9, which relates to the healing of the lame man. But the word here is used metaphorically. Now think about what it means to walk. When you think back to when you learned to walk, or you think back when your kids learned to walk and you watch them, it involved a lot of thought. It involved concentration. As you developed some skill at it, it related to discipline and regular practice. And before long, because you practiced it on a consistent basis, you no longer had to think about it. When you expand this out to and relate it to the skills in other areas of life, you realize that part of what was involved in that, even though it occurred when you were 2 or 3 years of age, was training. You're training your muscles a certain way so that before long it is a non-conscious activity. You don't ever think about it anymore. You're going to get up and you walk and you just do it. It comes automatically. But it only comes automatically because the process was ingrained in you. But if you were involved in an automobile accident where there was some neurological damage, you'd have to learn to walk all over again. Or if you reach a certain age, then all of a sudden walking becomes difficult. Perhaps you have hip replacement, knee replacement, surgery, whatever it may be, and suddenly you have to walk with a walker. And now walking again becomes a matter of thought and concentration. First time this really hit me occurred about 5 or 6 years ago. I was invited to come to a church in Poughkeepsie, New York, and to teach on the spiritual life. And I was going to teach on Galatians 5:16 that night, and I was thinking about how to present this and how to illustrate it. And I left my hotel room, went down to the elevator, and took the elevator down to the first floor. And when the elevator doors opened, I was confronted with the fact that there was some sort of senior convention there that particular night, and there were 50 gray and white-haired men and women walking past the elevator on their walkers. I couldn't get out of the elevator. I just had to stand there with the door open, but I'm watching each of these people go by with their little walkers. And I'm thinking, walk by means of the Spirit. There's something here that the Lord's got me focused on. They had to think.